This is Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston, bringing you stories of capitalism. Germany has gotten religion on defense spending with a nudge from President Trump. Zanny Beddoes of The Economist takes us through what it may mean for a sluggish European economy. Plus, putting new wine into old bottles. We take a look at one company that has remade itself successfully more than once, New Balance, and one that doesn't seem to be able to make the turn, Hertz. And the whole world of gaming is waiting for the 6th edition of Grand Theft Auto. Strauss Zelnick of Take-Two explains why he left a successful career as a movie mogul to get on the ground floor of video game creators. But we start with the story of coming to terms with the Trump administration, something so many people are trying to do, but few from a front row seat as a Democratic governor of a major northeastern state.
This is our House of Representatives. We're 151 legislators, lots of Democrats, a few Republicans get together every other year and work with us very closely in the budget. The budget's the document that sets your priorities for the state, and they have 151 different points of view.
I'm sure of that, but working very closely with, I'm not sure that's always going on in Washington. I mean, right now they're trying to figure out the budget and trying to cut the deficit, do all the things that we need to do. What advice do you have for President Trump and, for that matter, the leaders of the Congress?
For me, I get to know the legislatures. I get to know their family. I get to know what they're about. I get to know the leaders. You have a glass of wine. Not everything is politics all the time. I think that helps a lot. That'd be my recommendation in Washington as well. I think everything is all politics all the time. They give a speech and then they go back to their district.
The uncertainty, David, is really tough. We're in the middle of a budget cycle. We've got a good balanced budget. We know exactly how to get us to the finish line. But then if they cut $1 billion out of Medicaid, if they do something with the SNAP benefits, if they yank some of the infrastructure money, it's Bonnie bar the door. Everything's like an incoming missile. Every day there's something changes, but it could change back again.
You have to set priorities. Which are the missiles that you really need to intercept?
The big ones. The biggest is health care, in particular Medicaid. That's about $10–11 billion out of this budget, half paid for by the federal government. You hear a lot of the Doge talk about we want to get, in the case of Connecticut, about $880 million of savings out of health care. That's Medicaid. Medicaid, you know, almost half of our kids are born paid for by Medicaid. You know, over 2/3 of our folks in our nursing homes are paid for by Medicaid. So I got to watch that very carefully.
Do you have a sense that there's a deal to be made on some of these things? I mean, President Trump's autobiography was The Art of the Deal. Is there a deal? Can you work with Washington and get it to move your way?
I've gotten to know a lot of the secretaries down there. That's my job. It's a relationship game. So when it comes to, energy, I'm working very closely because we have very high energy prices here in New England. Maybe there's ways we can do nuclear power or natural gas, two places where our interests and the interests of the Trump administration are aligned. I've talked to their healthcare people. I was classmates with Bobby Kennedy many years ago, just a little bit about the impact of what Medicaid would be. So if there's a compromise, whatever you do, don't do it suddenly. Phase this in over a period of time and let us make some adjustments.
One of the things that it seems to be the case of is that President Trump will make a deal on two unrelated things. I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily with Medicare. It could be something else entirely unrelated that he wants you can give him.
And the deal could change the next day. You got to be very careful. I asked some of those secretaries, I said, how do you manage with a president who's like Mount Vesuvius? Every day it's erupting. And they say every day, whatever his comment is, we put the word today after it because tomorrow may be different. Look, that said, I'm going to work collaboratively with the president wherever I can. We're different parties. I always joke, he was down there in Greenwich. We were neighbors on and off for a little bit of time there. We both come out of the business world. Find places where you can work together. That's what governors are trying to do. But when you got to hold the line, you hold the line.
As you say, you were a successful businessman. And one of the things I learned in business is to discern between offensive decisions and defensive decisions. I mean, when it comes to Medicaid right now, you are on defense. Where can you go on offense? For example, in energy.
Energy, we're on offense. I went down there to Washington, D.C. All the Democrats mad as hell about the new administration. I went right to Doug Burgum. Doug Burgum was a governor of North Dakota, same time I was. Now he's like the energy czar. Chris Wright, the Secretary of Energy. I said, look, President Trump wants to reduce energy prices in places like New England where we have very high prices. So do I. This is a place where perhaps we can work together. and we are working together.
And what would you work on? How can you get energy prices down with the government?
They could expedite the permitting process and things like our Millstone nuclear power plant, get some modular nukes in there. That'd be always on carbon-free power. We have that right now, but the permitting process is so slow, it's expensive. There's natural gas. The cheapest natural gas in the country is the Marcellus down there in Pennsylvania. It comes by pipe across New York, but the pipe is congested. If we could do something there, I could bring in a lot of low-cost, low-burning, natural gas into our region. It's not just Connecticut; it's the New England region.
There's permitting not just at the federal level, but the state and even the local level. How much does Connecticut really hold up some of the permitting process when it comes to energy?
I think you'll hear this from most of the governors. 90% is related to federal. We have a lot of local issues that my job as governor is to speed them up so permitting doesn't, so that bridge doesn't take 5 years, so that nuclear expansion doesn't take 5 or 7 years. I have some control over that with the commissions we have here, but the bulk of it still comes out of the federal process. But the thing about energy, David, is it's got to be more of a national strategy. I mean, for me to do energy, I'm bringing in LNG from Europe, I'm bringing in natural gas from the Marcellus, but we're going through other states. We have to be able to regionalize that in a more productive way.
You've had a reputation of being pro-business, really trying to make Connecticut friendly to business. President Trump says he'd like to do that too. What's the route for him to do that? Is he pursuing that route?
I don't think so. I mean, what business likes, what consumers like, what governors like is a little bit of predictability and certainty. And that's the opposite of what we have right now coming out of Washington. It's pretty tough. I talked to Pratt & Whitney, I talked to EB, I talked to our big manufacturers about their future investment plans. And basically, I think we have to wait and see what the tariff situation is, don't we? We have no idea what the lay of the land's going to be. I told you how tough it is for a governor to budget when you just don't know what your federal revenue stream. You have no idea what your federal revenue stream is going to be. You may not know for months.
How do tariffs potentially affect Connecticut?
Well, we bring down, let's say, hydro from Canada and some gas. You put 20% on that, that would cost the ratepayers of our region $150 million. Pratt & Whitney, they make the jet engines. They import about, say, $3 billion of spare parts from Canada. 20% on that, $600 million. The F-35 starts getting a little more expensive.
Could Connecticut benefit? I mean, President Trump says that the goal of the tariffs is to have people make things in the United States. Could you benefit by actually having some foreign companies do more manufacturing in Connecticut?
Yeah, that's a good question. Not overnight. It's not like, boy, they're going to drop this factory over here. But I mentioned, too, I just, came back from India and went through eastern India, went to Chennai and Mumbai and Bangalore, and they're nervous as heck about trade in the United States. And I said, look, if you want to think about getting a foothold in the United States, everybody knows about New York and Boston, but Connecticut's a lot less expensive, equidistant to the biggest markets in the world. For example, I talked to a lot of the pharma guys when I was over there. Most of the generic drugs, or 40% of the generic drugs we have in the United States, come from India. You want to put 20% on that, all of a sudden your drugs get more expensive. So we're talking about how maybe they locate some of the manufacturing right here.
One of the things a lot of people are focused on is the potential effects of Trump administration policies on inflation and growth. And we had the Federal Reserve recently come out and say, less growth, more inflation, which is not something you want. How are you seeing that in Connecticut?
Our growth is still pretty good. We have one of the lowest unemployment rates, and we're adding more new businesses, small businesses than ever before. The inflation is tough. That really was a gut punch to middle-class folks. Everything got a lot more expensive. A lot of that was related to supply chain stuff coming out of COVID. I think they kept the money supply inflated too long, but you got to look forward. What can we do now? I've done everything to try and pay middle-class people a little more, minimum wage, bring down the price of health care where I can, make education less expensive. These are the pieces that really can hit a middle-class budget: education and health care and fuel.
You've balanced the budget every year you've been governor. And as far as I can tell, often it's through a combination of cutting some costs and also raising some taxes in some places. Right now, it seems like in Washington, the Democrats only want to raise taxes and the Republicans only want to cut costs. Do they need to do both?
I think the biggest thing for us, David, is growth. We've had good, strong economic growth every year. That allows me to put more money into education and more money into transportation and cut taxes for the middle class. And that's what we're able to do. Before I got here, every year was sort of herky-jerky. Nobody knew what to expect, a little bit like what we see in Washington right now. Here, that constancy is giving people the confidence to invest.
Coming up, Germany decides to dip into its sacred piggy bank to fund a major expansion in defense spending. Economist editor-in-chief Zanny Beddoes explains why and what it could mean for the European economy. That's next on Wall Street Week. This is a story about shock and awe, something we hear about as a tactic in warfare, but that usually doesn't come up in public exchanges among those who have been allies for 80 years.
The EU treats us very, very unfairly, very badly.
We have to rely on our own defense industrial base. We cannot buy American products when it gets to defense because, you know, there is a string attached. There is a double key.
Zanny Beddoes is editor-in-chief of The Economist and has a front-row seat for the increasingly strained relations between Western Europe and the United States, and how the Europeans are taking it.
This is the first time I've been in New York since President Trump took over, since the inauguration. And I'm struck at how relatively little I think people here are focused on just how dramatically the perception of the US, actually around the world, but particularly in Europe, has changed. But what's happened in the last few weeks has really shocked Europeans because they have realized that a significant element of this administration is outright hostile to Europe, doesn't like Europe, particularly the European Union as a concept. One shouldn't exaggerate too much from sort of individual moments of theater because this is an administration that loves moments of theater. But nonetheless, that dressing down of President Zelensky in the Oval Office had a visceral reaction in Europe because it was watched by, everyone I met had watched it, even people who aren't usually interested in current affairs, and everyone had just been shocked at the treatment of this man, this brave man, speaking in his third language by the President of the United States. And those two were sort of powerful examples of, I think, a recognition in Europe that actually maybe the United States is not a country that Europe can rely on. And the country that created the North Atlantic, the NATO agreement, the country that built the post-war order, the country, the United States, that's always been the backbone of this post-war system, I think Europeans have just been really shocked. And of course things can change, and of course there can be a change in the relationship with Ukraine and all of those things, but even if things now go to a more conventional place, Europe has been shocked, and shocked such that I think every single politician in Europe is having to think about, can we rely on the United States? Can we really only think about a world where we spend more and we have a NATO which is the same except that we spend more? Or do we need to think about having a plan B in case this really is a country that is hostile to us and it is outright bent on not having our interests at heart? And that's a really big shift for Europe. And I think that it's something that is going to, the upside, I hope, is that it will be one of those moments that galvanizes Europe.
When you say Europe is shocked, I guess my question is shocked into action. If you're Europe, what do you do?
Well, that's always the question with Europe, that you can have a lot of pearl clutching and then nothing actually happens. But I think you've seen enough already to take a view that this is different. If you look at what's happened in Germany, and Friedrich Merz, the soon-to-be Chancellor of Germany, very clearly saying it's 5 minutes to midnight, we will do everything it takes. And that's a phrase, remember, that is associated with Mario Draghi, who was during the Euro crisis, president of the European Central Bank, and he said they would do everything that it takes to hold the euro together. The same language, Friedrich Merz very clearly signaling that Germany, which is of course the biggest economy in Europe and the one that has been obsessed with its fiscal prudence and its debt brake, would do everything that was necessary to increase defense spending. And you've seen other countries in Europe, Poland talking about nuclear weapons. You've seen big changes. And I think this could be one of those moments where the European Commission is galvanized. They're making it easier to find resources to pay for a very significant increase in defense spending. And to give you a scale of it, the European Union countries spend about 1.8% of GDP on defense, which is well below, as President Trump would tell you, the 2% that they're supposed to, and certainly nowhere near enough if they can't rely on the United States. How much Europe needs to spend depends on how, darker scenario you want to paint in terms of the US turning its back on Europe and the threat posed by Vladimir Putin. But at the very least, it's a doubling of defense spending, 3.5, 3.6% of GDP. That's a huge increase in defense spending. And so one question is, will the Europeans actually do it? Because they're slow growing, they're indebted, they're high tax economies. I think this German shift is a very, very big moment, because I think it signals that the one country that has the capacity to borrow a lot more is intending to do so. The European Union can, as it did during COVID, actually issue joint bonds to pay for this. I think you will have more what you call safe assets in Europe, more commonly issued debt, which investors actually may well lap up, because people will be looking for a non-dollar asset that is a safe asset. So I think you could see a big shift in European financial markets. If this money on defense is spent well and spent effectively, you could see a kick-starting to technological innovation. Look at drone capability that's being developed in Ukraine. If the Europeans work with the Ukrainians, provide the financial wherewithal to really kind of develop and scale up that capability, that's an area where Europe is now at the cutting edge of military infrastructure. That's one of the reasons why European defense stocks have been soaring, because there is the potential in Europe to do that. Now, there's a ton of things that could go wrong. Never underestimate European countries' ability to think about their parochial interests rather than what makes sense for Europe as a whole. One of the consequences of what Donald Trump has done may well be to unify Europe, to increase its defense spending substantially, which is, of course, what he wants, but actually also to kickstart Europe's economies and to kickstart its capability of having a financial asset that would, over time, be something which might be, eventually become an alternative to the dollar.
Policy paves the way for defense spending, but financial institutions play a critical role in getting the money to the manufacturers, whether it's startups or major companies. In the EU and UK, the laws on the books make it hard for defense companies to get the capital they need.
I think we see frictions of two kinds. One of the frictions that we're seeing is that for some investors, they're not able to allocate as much of their capital to defense and security startups, because sometimes those startups are put on restricted lists. Traditionally, some investors have shied away from investing in defense and security because it's not seen as being aligned with ESG priorities. I think our view is that, in fact, if we really want to have peace and prosperity, we have to be able to invest in defense and security capabilities so that we can protect our countries, our nations, our communities, and our populations. The other barrier that we're sometimes seeing as limiting the amount of capital flowing into startups is really whether or not the startups can access markets at pace. It's all very well for a ministry to say, look, I'm really interested in buying your new capability. But if it takes them 5 years to provide a contract, that's going to have a really dampening effect on the opportunities that these startups see.
Countries in Europe are under pressure to figure out how to serve their individual interests while addressing a priority for the whole Union. We may, as you say, be seeing the political will in much of Europe to move forward. Is there the capacity, and particularly, is the capacity in leadership? You've got to make some tough decisions about where to get the money and how to spend it.
You have, and I think the easy answer to your question would be to say, look around Europe and there are only kind of political pygmies. But actually, I think that's, and I've made that argument myself, but I think that's slightly unfair. If you look at, for example, Friedrich Merz, whom I interviewed before the German election, and I asked him about some of these questions. What did Germany need to do on defense and so forth? And he was unwilling to really sort of put his neck out. He was quite cautious. And he's a man who's been a staunch Atlanticist all his life. And you could forgive that, I suppose, because it was just before an election and he doesn't want to say anything terribly controversial. But it made me worry exactly as you suggest, that is this man someone who can really step up if needed? And frankly, what we've seen since the election, in light of what President Trump has done, has actually been, I think, pretty remarkable. Others have real constraints. Emmanuel Macron, President of France, I think, loves grandiloquent language and grand gestures, and I'm sure he wants to do all of this. In fact, to his credit, he was the man who, a few years ago said to us that NATO was brain dead and that Europe needed more strategic autonomy. He's worried about this for a long time. His problem is that he's actually very weak domestically, and the domestic politics within France make it harder for him. Keir Starmer, Prime Minister of Britain, I think has come out so far very well. He also he's trying to hew a very difficult line, because on the one hand, Britain traditionally the special relationship with the United States, our military is particularly entwined with the United States, our intelligence, so forth, members of the Five Eyes, all of that stuff. The Brits are very, very keen to hug the US close, but at the same time, he has worked very effectively with Emmanuel Macron, in particular on Ukraine. He's very clearly trying to shape a European response. And I think he's risen to the occasion. Again, in the UK's case, in order to fund the kind of defence expending that we need to do, he actually needs to do the radical pro-growth reforms which he talked about, but again, we worried that the Starmer government would not be sufficiently bold to do. If he does that, he will also be deserving of the praise. And with him, I think more in hope more than expectation, we put on the cover just a couple of weeks ago, Winston Starmer, and had him, dressed like Winston Churchill. It's early days. Ask me again in a few months whether they live up to it. But I think those would be the three people I would look out for.
Defense spending is just one part of the bigger European issue of remaining barriers among member states, including in financial regulation and capital markets.
I'm mindful of the name of your publication, The Economist. Can Europe get to where it needs to go without fundamental reform of the capital markets?
The simple answer is no. In the medium term, no. Capital Markets Union is a kind of aspiration that the European Union has had for a long time and has made very little progress on. I think it's essential. I think the creation of a safe asset that can be a common asset for investors to hold in Europe is essential. I think this stuff can come and will come actually eventually, but you will not have a dynamic European continent without that. I think it's completely essential, but it's not the only thing. There's all kinds of other. You need a much more pro-growth regulatory environment. You need to have a European Commission which is much more focused on creating the conditions for risk-taking, for innovation, for growth, that doesn't think that things needed to be regulated first. I mean, the attitude towards tech has been very telling, right, in Europe, where the European Union has probably got the most aggressive and encompassing tech regulation, but actually, no major tech company to speak of. That kind of thing has to be changed. And I don't want to appear kind of Panglossian. I think it's perfectly possible that Europe could fail to do what we've been talking about. But I do think this moment, these last few weeks, have given Europe a sort of a shock that has had a kind of consequence in Europe that I wasn't anticipating. There is now a sense of urgency. There's a sense of what's at stake, which could just be the galvanizing moment that is needed for this to really happen.
Coming up, we look at two companies that have been around a while and decided they needed a reset. New Balance, which got the reset right, and Hertz, which didn't. This is a story about renewal. Companies that have known great success but face changing tastes and changing markets. Companies that have to rethink what they're doing to find success. Some do it well.
An apparel company, New Balance, really continuing to expand the U.S. manufacturing presence.
And some get it wrong.
A pair of finance veterans bought the bankrupt car rental company Hertz in 2021 and went all in on electric, and it turned out to be a bad bet.
It was not long ago that New Balance was known for the ultimate dad sneaker.
What happened to your feet?
What do you mean? These are my 407s.
Oh, they're 407s. Can I see them?
Yep. These offer a lot of support.
Right.
Whoa, come on!
And now it's a shoe worn by celebrities and runway models. Joe Preston is the CEO who's overseen the latest transformation of a company dating back to 1906.
New Balance was the first athletic brand to have an NBA player with $1 million contract. By the time the late 80s came along, New Balance was struggling. All of our competitors had moved all of their production from the U.S. over to Asia, And that, in part, put us at a little bit of a competitive disadvantage. And then in the early 90s, we retracted and just focused on running. We wanted to make sure that we could carve out a positioning with that new strategy. But then around 2008, 2009, we knew we needed to get younger. We knew we needed to get back into sport, and we made an entry into baseball. And we set this lofty goal of being #1 in baseball within 5 years. And in the beginning, there was a lot of doubt internally as to whether or not we could do that.
It wasn't a straight ride up as New Balance went through its transition. Its global sales fell from an estimated $4.5 billion in 2018, that's the year Preston took over, down to some $3.4 billion in 2020. But then they took off, hitting $7.8 billion last year, an approximate 73% increase under Preston's leadership. What caused you to have a couple of years that were challenged?
I wouldn't say we were going south, we were going sideways. We had a rapid growth that was happening internationally, specifically in North Asia and in Europe, and then that had flatlined. And we were not able to take truly advantage of the brand here in North America. And so we reset in 2019 to try to put the company in position for growth. And then obviously COVID hit, which kind of stalled things a little bit. But we could see in the back half of 2020 that the brand was beginning to resonate. And we've been able to grow 20+% for 4 consecutive years.
There's 3 key traps that I think are key to understanding why some firms are better situated to reinvent themselves.
Ryan Raffaelli is a Harvard Business School professor who teaches corporate reinvention.
The first trap is the trap that I call the identity trap. And this is too tightly coupling the questions around who we are with a very specific product or service. And so we get so tied to one product or service that we sort of lose sight of everything else around us. The second trap is one that I call the architecture trap. And this is where we think about you have different products and services on an S-curve, sort of at different phases of maturity. And what often happens is in organizations is they're designed where all the same systems and structures and incentives are applied to early stage innovations versus processes of innovation that may be needed for later stage, more mature products. And this can often kill out the early stage. There's a third trap, the collaboration trap. And this is a trap where what you see is that individuals tasked with innovation at different phases of an S-curve often begin to either not trust each other, and you get this internal resentment that can often kill off innovation for reinvention that has to happen for the future.
New Balance successfully skirted those 3 traps, leading to a revamp that's allowed the company to expand its footprint, sponsoring both the New York City and London marathons and hosting athletic events at their own Boston track.
Today will mark the opening of the New Balance Nationals. We'll have 6,000 of the best track and field high school athletes in the country that come to campus here and come to this brand new facility.
But is this a revenue raiser for you? Does this work? Not really?
No, this is you know, this is an opportunity for us to engage with these young athletes.
And the athletes are engaging back. Coco Gauff, Kawhi Leonard, Bukayo Saka, and perhaps the biggest of them all, Shohei Ohtani, all New Balance athletes.
This is all of Shohei's collection. You can also see those are his signature cleats.
Samantha Siciliano is the lead athlete insights researcher at New Balance.
The collaboration with the athletes is key for us. We learn so much from them, and it's stuff that we can use for all of our pros, but it's also things that we can use for our community athletes and make sure that those athletes are getting the best product possible.
The reason why that we can enter into these sports is twofold. One of them is that our product engine is just so strong. The investment that we make continually into product and innovation, and through our sports research center, we can go in and test any different type of product for any of those sports. And the other element is, as the brand is becoming more widely known, we have athletes coming to us from these various sports looking to be part of the brand.
As you evolve the company, how do you retain some of the basics and at the same time innovate and go into new places? How do you get that balance right?
It is 70-30. 70 meaning making sure we are retaining the culture that we have here because we believe it to be a differentiator. You know, we're a family-owned company. We're privately held, And how we operate is as important as the results. And I think we have strengthened our culture as we have grown. But it's a challenge. You continue to add people as you get larger, and you just want to make sure that people are assimilating and are also contributing to a strong culture that you have.
New Balance's Sports and Innovation Lab is a key part of the company's architecture, giving it a recipe for some of its greatest hits.
This is Andy. He is our walking, sweating mannequin. He is what we can use to determine some of those thermoregulation metrics that I was speaking about. His priority is really looking at insulation and sweat permeability.
All of our performance shoes are tested in the Smash Lab. We test all of our running shoes in the Run Lab that you're going to see next.
In this space, there are 26 cameras. That's going to help us understand every detail about how the runner is moving.
So when we think about technological changes, most firms, we can go back to these classic theories of like the S-curve, right? The idea that you have a technology or a product associated with that. It sort of starts in its infancy, it then starts to move through a period of growth, and then it eventually matures. And so for many firms, they're managing these S-curves within. And what often happens in processes of reinvention is what you tend to see is that for established firms, they don't have the luxury of just managing one of these curves at a time. And so the challenge for them is to try to figure out, well, how do you manage multiple curves with products and services that sit at different phases of those S-curves simultaneously and keep the whole thing running? It's one of the core components, right? Because you're having to think about not only what do you need to do to make yourself successful today and appease your current customer base, but also what's the next thing that will potentially drive growth and revenue in the years ahead.
If New Balance was a company that successfully appealed to both its former and new customer bases, Hertz is far from it.
Hertz has the largest EV rental fleet in North America, charged and ready to go.
Let's go. The car rental company has gone through countless failed reinventions, most recently making a bold move to replace much of its fleet with Tesla electric vehicles.
We know our corporate travelers want electric vehicles to go visit their clients and do business in. We know our leisure travelers want electric vehicles. It's a great way for them to try electric vehicle without committing.
Let's turn our attention to Hertz. The rental car company misses its estimates as it sells its fleet of Tesla EVs.
The company lost $2.9 billion in 2024 on its failed bet, offloading 30,000 EVs. Its market cap slumping from a peak of $16 billion in 2021 to sit at just over $1 billion today.
The EV strategy actually was suggested by one of the private equity partners who bought Hertz out of bankruptcy. And at the time, it seemed like a great idea.
Yale professor Jacob Thomas studied Hertz's failure to reinvent itself time and time again.
Some of the reasons that worked against them, I think one of it was just people didn't know how to drive the cars. They treated them badly. The repair, was much higher than expected. People complained about not finding charging stations and then having to pay Hertz for the cars that were uncharged. The completely unexpected thing that happened is that Tesla, facing demand issues and they're worried about the federal tax credit, they lowered the prices of their cars. And so if the new car prices fall, the used car prices fall. Hertz is in trouble because it has to make up the difference. So I think it was just a combination of unexpected things. I think it was worth trying, but in hindsight, it was probably something that's going to cost them a lot.
Ultimately, Thomas believes luck can contribute to a company's reinvention.
I think Hertz has had their share of bad luck. They were doing really well until the pandemic hit. One could argue that the EV strategy was a good one, but it didn't work out.
Luck is about when opportunity meets preparation, and that is the core to reinvention.
The annals of business history are littered with bad luck stories of corporate reinvention. But for the successful few, like New Balance, the ability to strategize, innovate, and execute goes beyond just good luck.
As you look out, what do you examine to figure out this will keep us going as opposed to that one, I'm not sure that's going to get us there?
But we're trying to make sure that the brand is positioned from a premium standpoint. And when you do that, you've got to be cognizant that you can grow, but you got to have controlled growth. So as we look out into the future, trying to maintain a growth rate that we've had the past few years is not the first thing that we're looking at. It's the quality of growth. And so as we look forward, we know that sport continues to be an area that we can develop. Apparel is a big opportunity, but all of it's under this guise of making sure that we are following a distribution strategy, and today we're doing that.
Coming up, the $200 billion market of video gaming is about to get a new version of its most popular game ever, Grand Theft Auto 6. We talked to the man bringing it to you, Strauss Zelnick of Take-Two. That's next on Wall Street Week. This is a story about the power of play, how video games can entertain us, connect us, and bring out our competitive side.
It's highly social. It's highly engaging.
I love video games.
Last of Us Part 1 and 2, The Witcher, God of War.
The video game industry has grown into a nearly $200 billion global market, larger than film, television, and music combined, and is projected to grow around 6% annually.
The really big hits of today, the Call of Duties, the Fortnites, the EA Sports football clubs, the Grand Theft Autos, they just keep becoming more and more dominant.
In addition to being an avid gamer himself, Doug Kreutz is the senior media, entertainment, and gaming analyst at TD Cowen. He's been following the industry trends for decades and has witnessed one game in particular outshine the rest.
GTA 5 has sold over 200 million units life to date, which is far and away the most that any video game has ever sold. It's not even close. Has probably generated $10 billion in revenue life to date.
Lines are long, but it's pretty worth it.
Rockstar Games, a subsidiary of video game holding company Take-Two Interactive, released Grand Theft Auto 5 back in 2013.
Today, it's still the standard bearer for the industry, even though it was launched so many years ago. And that's kind of astonishing in a business where the technology is continuing to change at a pretty steep rate.
Strauss Zelnick is the chairman and CEO of Take-Two, which is also behind successes like NBA 2K, Borderlands, and Red Dead Redemption. But all eyes are on its next installment of the Grand Theft Auto series, GTA 6, set to be released this fall.
I saw the trailer and it was pretty crazy.
I'm excited. I played 5 a lot growing up.
I would be willing to spend 100. It's just that legendary.
The anticipation for that title may be the greatest anticipation I've ever seen for an entertainment property, and I've been around the block a few times.
It's been 12 years now. Why does it take that long to come up with 6?
We set an intention, actually, to rest our intellectual property. So some of our competitors come to market very regularly, maybe even annually. We think you need to create enormous anticipation on the one hand. On the other hand, it takes a long time to develop these big, robust experiences. Rockstar Games seeks perfection.
Take-Two is a major publisher and developer of AAA titles, a classification used within the industry for high-profile games with high budgets.
Luckily, we have the balance sheet for it. It's one of the reasons that standing up a company in a garage today will be awfully difficult. So in a way, the incremental costs have enhanced the barriers to entry to benefit companies like ours. We have team sizes that are as small as 20 people in the mobile space and as large as thousands of people in the console space.
Even after spending all that money and time developing a game, how does a company know if it will be a hit or a miss?
You would look at the sales of the last iteration, or in the case of new intellectual property, you'd sort of get a sense of what you think that thing looks like and compare it to other similar releases. We have consumers come in and play the games along the way and give us feedback. In the movie business, there is testing, but what do you test? You can't really test before you have a rough cut. To have a rough cut, you've shot the entire thing.
The only way we're going to get through this is by sticking together, being a team.
Like movie studios, gaming companies also market their product by releasing trailers before a game debuts. To date, the trailer for Grand Theft Auto 6 has racked up more than 245 million views on YouTube. What's the revenue stream look like? How do you get your money?
In the case of console and PC, there's a free-to-play business, but that is largely a business where you purchase a unit, and then you often have the opportunity to engage in an ongoing basis after the original purchase through a multiplayer, for example, experience, and that would be also monetized in-game.
The question is, how much in-game revenue can it generate? GTA 5 currently probably generates around $500 million a year in in-game revenue. Now that's a lot of money, but it's less than half of what Call of Duty generates. It's probably less than a third of what EA Sports Football Club generates, and it's maybe 15% of what Fortnite generates. I do think that GTA 6 Online will be bigger and better than GTA 5, and it will probably be more successful. And the only question is, how much more successful?
But Strauss isn't putting all his eggs in one basket. In 2022, Take-Two acquired mobile gaming giant Zynga in an $11 billion deal.
It was the most expensive acquisition that had been done in the interactive entertainment business. It was eclipsed quickly by the Microsoft Activision deal. But at the time, it was a big deal, and certainly a big deal for us. Mobile represents 50% of our net bookings. It's a very successful business, and we have new hits. Our goal on the mobile side is to have the #1 market share in mobile. We're not there yet. We're heading in that direction.
About 190 million people between the ages of 5 and all the way up to 90 play video games in the United States, and approximately 3 billion people play worldwide. So how did the video game industry become the behemoth in the entertainment sector that it is today?
It goes back in some ways to the 1960s, when some people were fiddling around with electronic equipment and seeing what they could do with it. From a commercial point of view, it really started in sort of the mid to late 70s with the Magnavox. The Atari 2600 was one of the first kind of mainstream consoles. The next big thing was the launch of the Nintendo, the original Nintendo Entertainment System back in the mid-80s, which really took off and made video games sort of a permanent feature of the entertainment landscape. It's gone from being sort of PC-focused and then console-focused, and now, of course, we've got the mobile game industry, which is actually a majority of the industry now, in part because everybody owns a mobile device.
In 2020, the pandemic shut down the world, which further fueled the market. And while lockdowns hurt businesses like restaurants and tourist attractions, the video game industry got a major boost, even for a short while.
The industry grew well over 30% in 2020, and there was some sort of residual growth in 21. And then people came back out of their houses again. A lot of firms sort of saw the increased demand and chased it, maybe unwisely. People were chasing talent. And again, I think that led to overinvestment. And then when things moderated, a lot of people got caught off base.
It is estimated that globally, more than 14,000 video game workers were laid off in 2024. Up from roughly 10,000 the year before.
One of the things I'm probably most proud of in my career, given that I don't really have any creative talent at all myself, is that I seem to have some ability to figure out who's really talented and somehow convince them to work within our system, and then most importantly, then to pursue their passions, their genuine creative passions. One of the questions I'm often asked is, does generative AI mean that someone sitting at home can ask ChatGPT 14 to make a GTA competitor, code it, give me the marketing materials, and we're off to the races? I don't believe for a minute that that's going to happen. There's no evidence that tool sets allow people to win creatively. To the contrary, I think these are phenomenal digital tools, and the more mundane tasks will be done more automatically.
Still, 30% of game developers believe generative AI is having a negative effect on the industry, according to a recent report by the Game Developers Conference.
I know that generative AI is really nothing but a copyright minefield. I will never use generative AI. I will never use anything created from AI, mostly because most AI is trained on data sets that I have no idea what they are.
In contrast to the AAA gaming companies like Take-Two, independent developers create their own games with significantly less funding. They flock to the annual GDC in San Francisco to show off their latest projects and maybe even attract some investors.
Feeling inspired by other developers is a big part of GDC for me. I
I think it is possible to take more risks in smaller studios. The budget is smaller, so there's less of a monetary risk. The folks that start these smaller studios are usually looking to tell a story that's unique and different.
Sharon Khan is the lead producer at Visai Games, a small independent studio that swept up awards last year for its game Venba.
The winner is Venba.
Venba.
Venba!
And the BAFTA goes to Venba.
I remember when we first started working on it, there was a bit of a joke that, oh, maybe we'll win the grand prize at the IGFs, but I don't think anyone really expected it. You're essentially playing in the role of an Indian immigrant mother. Her and her husband come to Toronto and they start a new life. They end up getting pregnant and having a kid right as they're like about to think about going back because they're struggling financially in Canada. And the story just goes through the relationship Venba has with her son, and it's told through food and cooking. It's probably going to get people to call their mom.
The game has been quite successful, making over 2 times its budget back in sales and exceeding $1 million in revenue. But before a game can thrive, independent developers often need funding to bring their vision to life.
It was really difficult to get support at that time because Venba was considered too risky and too weird. We made a trailer for this event called Wholesome Games Direct, and the trailer ended up blowing up, and that's when we started getting contacted by various publishers and funding sources. We managed to get funding directly from platforms such as Microsoft, Xbox, and Sony, and so we decided not to go with a publisher, and that along with an Ontario Creates Fund, which is like a government grant in Canada, we were good to go for the rest of production.
Whether it's a small independent release or a big studio one, video games do more than just entertain players. They help connect users to other people, cultures, and even imaginary lands.
Our focus around here is to be of service to our consumers, to engage them and captivate them and delight them. If we get that right, then the numbers will take care of themselves.
Up next, Strauss Zelnick takes us from the heights of Tinseltown to the heart of Silicon Valley and getting in on the ground floor of video gaming back in the day. For 100 years, the pinnacle of the entertainment business in the United States has been making movies in Hollywood. As a young man, Strauss Zelnick was at that pinnacle, but set out for new adventures in video games.
I was president of a movie studio, 20th Century Fox. I'd been there for some time, and I spent 7 years in the movie business. I'd overseen 155 movies, and it became clear that this was a mature business. Fun, but mature. And I remember saying to myself, I really want as a business that is the movie business, but in 1927, the heyday of its business. And I sort of looked around and said, what would that be? And it occurred to me that was the video game business. And then coincidentally, I was recruited to join a startup in the video game space. So you're looking at the only person who's voluntarily left the job of president of 20th Century Fox to go to a raw startup in Silicon Valley.
So 1993 was a while ago. How mature is the business now?
It's much more mature, and the hallmarks of a mature entertainment business are generally the same. You see consolidation. You see the big get bigger. You see capital go towards those big companies, and it becomes a top 10 or 20 business at any given time. Those hallmarks do exist already. The growth case, though, is a reflection of the fact that our average player is still 37 or 38 years old, and you engage with the same entertainment that you fell in love with at the age of 17 for the rest of your life. You don't stop engaging with it. So as that average player turns 39, he or she doesn't stop playing. They keep playing, and more people enter the cohort, of course. So mathematically, we should expect growth in this business for some time to come.
So what happened in the United States? Go back to the 1920s. You want to replicate
1927.
1927. But what happened in the film business that's different from the video game business?
Well, the studio system went away, and there are a couple reasons for that. But basically the business really materially changed in the mid-50s, so before we were born. And that was when there was a consent decree in 1955 that disaggregated cinema distribution from production on the one hand, and the advent and growth of network television on the other hand. And finally, the desire of certain creators to become independent of the major studios and the studios' willingness to work with those independent creators. And the biggest, most important and threshold example of that was Desilu, Lucille Ball and Des Yarnaz's studio, which created not just I Love Lucy, but other hits as well, and really demonstrated to creators that if you're good enough and powerful enough in the system, you can ultimately own your own intellectual property. That broke apart the studio system, and suddenly now you're working with independent contractors who are creative, who basically can be made available to anyone who has the financial resources and the marketing and distribution resources to support their activities. That doesn't exist in the interactive entertainment business. We own our intellectual property, and our teams are gainfully employed, happily employed, and kept busy inside the four walls of our enterprise.
So that means that you participate in the upside with a hit, which is good, which is much more difficult in film and TV these days.
Well, film and TV, it's got an element of sort of, heads I win, tails you lose as a big company, which is to say, in success, the creative teams quite properly are able to extract a lot of the economic rents. But in failure, the financing entity bears the entire cost.
Are there things that you can do to get an indication of whether it's a hit in advance? I mean, in the film business, as I understand it, for example, you'll have focus groups. So before the studio actually launches the film, they have some sense of where it's going. Do you have that for Grand Theft Auto 6, for example?
Yes, very much so. And now this wouldn't necessarily be true for a big console release, but for many releases, we can actually go out into the market and test actively. We do so in the mobile space, where you'll go to 6 or 7 different countries, not your biggest markets, not the US, and you will test the products well before you launch them. And on the console side, we can do a lot of testing as well, and we do. We have consumers come in and play the games along the way and give us feedback. You're right, in the movie business, there is testing, but what do you test? You can't really test before you have a rough cut. To have a rough cut, you've shot the entire thing. And that's why there are more reshoots today than ever before, but reshoots are really expensive. Having overseen a lot of movies, you're already in trouble if you're in reshoot land.
How sensitive is your business to outside factors? For example, consumer sentiment. If consumers start spending less, does it affect your business overall, or some parts of your business more than others?
I wish I could say that we were counter-cyclical. There are people who believe the entertainment business is, that old chestnut of, times are tough, so entertainment's not expensive, and I'll soothe myself when I'm unhappy with the economy by consuming more entertainment. It's not really the case. We are pretty well correlated with the economy. So in tough economic times, we will also be hurt. It is not true, for example, that in the Great Depression, the movie studios did fine. In fact, nearly all of them went bankrupt. So, we're subject to the economy for all the reasons you'd expect. If consumers have less money to spend, they'll spend less on entertainment too. Arguably, we could be disproportionately hurt, although we do not seem to be. And sometimes we can be we wouldn't be counter-cyclical, but sometimes we don't track the economy so closely because, for example, to consume a mobile experience, it's free. You can enjoy the experience without paying anything. And if you do pay, these can be quite small numbers. These are not big expenditures.
Since you got involved in 1993, technology has evolved a long way.
Oh, sure.
And if anything, it seems to be evolving even faster today. We don't know where. How has it changed your business, and how do you anticipate where it's going?
Well, what's changed is our ability to create something spectacular. And I think that's what will continue to change. We have not reached the technological asymptote that was reached, frankly, long ago in motion pictures and television. And the effect of generative AI on motion pictures and television, in my opinion, is you may end up reducing the cost profile. I'm not sure that the visual effects will be better because of generative AI, but they may be quicker and cheaper. With regard to our business, there's still a lot to be done visually, graphically in our games. So our game NBA 2K, if you squint, it looks like real basketball, but you still have to squint a little bit. It's still animation. It's terrific animation. But we don't really have, in interactive entertainment, something yet that really looks like live action. But technology will get us there, probably in a shorter period of time than maybe even I expect. That doesn't mean that every game is going to look like live action. That wouldn't make any sense, creatively. But that will be another tool in our toolkit. That's generated by technology. It'll be the intersection of the technology and human genius that will create hits on an ongoing basis. I'll give you an example. When I started in 1993, if we wanted to create a lawn in a video game, we had artists who had to create an individual blade of grass, or it would just look like paint. Well, today, if one of our artists wants to create a lawn, they press a button, lawn. Like, that's before generative AI. So I think you're going to see much more of that, but that's not really going to change the character of the business. And I wish I could say it would reduce our cost. For some of our lighter offerings, it may. For example, level creation in the mobile business is probably going to become more efficient. For our big, robust releases, the cost reduction that we may find with technology will be swamped by the ability to do more, and we're going to want to do more, and our consumers will demand more. I think the mistakes that people make is to believe somehow that generative AI is going to reduce employment. You know, the history of technology is it increases employment. And, you know, even the paperless office, turns out offices use more paper than they ever had before. So I think that technology will allow us to do more for our consumers. That'll build the market. That will increase employment. But the exciting thing is, you know, the ability to make something that's even more beautiful, even more compelling, even more interesting.
That does it for us here at Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston. This is Bloomberg. See you next week for more stories of capitalism.